the people of sake actually brought me into sake.
Back in 1988, this place was actually in Ginza on the main drag.
At first it was kind of soy sauce, it was miso.
To the point where it actually changed my life.
New Year's Day 1989.
Not just sake as a beverage, but all the culture and history.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into another episode of Sake on Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to expanding the dialogue surrounding Japan's iconic beverages, sake, shochu, and of course, awamori. Our show is made possible with the support of the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association. My name is Frank, and today we are joined by Aaron Howe to talk about tasting. Hi, Aaron. How you doing?
Hello.
So before we get started about our topic today, Aaron, let's learn a little bit about you. Because we're friends. I should mention that up front. Aaron and I have been friends for a couple years now, and we actually do a tasting experience sometimes as well in Tokyo. But how did you get into sake in the first place?
Yeah, so I moved to Tokyo in 2019 from the Bay Area, San Francisco. And initially I actually knew nothing about sake, but I had it in my head to do a sake business. And that's where I got started on sake. So, I wanted to open essentially a sake tasting / bottle shop. And in order to do that, we must learn about sake.
Why'd you want to do that in Japan and not in the US?
So I saw a YouTube video or multiple YouTube videos of a place called Ponshukan, which is essentially has a lot of sake vending machines in one place. And you essentially put a coin in, you get a little shot of sake. And I thought, hey, I can do this idea in Tokyo and probably be good business. So, initially it wasn't like, oh, I love sake from drinking it. It was purely a business thing. But when I started studying for it, I thought, wow, this is very delicious. And at least in Japan, the cost performance is very, very good.
Yeah. I didn't know that. So you really were not a sake guy before you came to Japan.
Oh, not at all. In fact, drinking for me before I came to Japan was how can I get drunk the quickest without tasting something really, really gross?
Okay. Is that not kind of how you still are?
No. I have to drink deliciously before I get drunk. If it involves drinking crap, I'd rather not drink at all.
Fair. Okay, so you came to Japan. Has that worked out? Do you own a Ponshukan-like place now, or?
So the Ponshukan idea is kind of on the side because of logistical challenges, but now I am a part owner of a sake shop called Sake Base in Chiba. I also am owner of a sake izakaya called Craft Sake Shoten and Kitchen. Very long name, but we do creative food and a revolving seasonal sake menu. And on top of that, Frank, you and I do a tasting course together. It's called Sake Studio, and we do it certain weekends of the month.
Yeah. Okay, so now it's mostly sake all the time for you, though.
Yes, now it's sake all the time. I do drink wine on the side, and I do like tasting different drinks, but sake is my main thing.
Yeah. What was the sake that got you into? Because I guess business decision to move to Japan, business decision to kind of try to do the Ponshukan thing in Tokyo, even though that hasn't really worked out. What was the, oh, wait, this isn't just a business for me, maybe, thing that happened?
I think when we taste sake outside of Japan, especially outside of any type of guidance, we tend to think that, oh, it's this really kind of gross, alcoholic, ricey drink that you sometimes get at like Japanese restaurants. And it's kind of a novelty more than a actual pleasant thing to drink. But then when I came to Japan, there are a couple of sakes that really changed my mind. I think one of the first that I thought was really interesting was Kazunomori from Nara, which is made with hard water. So it's mineral-y. It is a little bit bubbly as well, with a relatively high aroma for something that's very bubbly and mineral tasting. And then I remember the first sake where I thought, wow, sake can be this delicious is Hana Abi from Saitama, which is a very fruity, very high aroma, um, Junmai Dai Ginjo Muroka Nama Genshu style of sake. And my palate's evolved a lot since then, but having these sakes that are basically only available in Japan and really difficult to get anywhere outside, those are the ones that really changed my mind.
Where did you have those? Like, did you go to the brewery as you were like learning about sake, or like where did you find them?
So I would go around different shops to see what type of businesses people are running and how many people were in the restaurants and whatnot and the bars. And one of my go-to places became a place called Craft Sake Shoten, which might sound familiar because I just introduced my restaurant. But the owner of Craft Sake Shoten is an American gentleman by the name of Brian. And he has a standing sake bar where you can try out one of his 30, 40 sakes for just 500 yen a piece. And occasionally he'll have some really special things that are hard to get. So, I used to be quite the regular there. And in fact, Brian and I became friends and we became business partners very soon after.
Oh, okay. So Brian kind of introduced you to sake, and then
Um, I was going around drinking a lot of different places, but I think Brian at that time had been in Australia a couple years already, and he knew his sake a lot better than I did back then. And he's someone I could talk with about sake with in English, and that
uh-huh.
always helps. Just having someone to bounce notes off of, and having someone who knows their sake to kind of show you what they think is good and all of just having guidance is a really nice way to get started, I
Yeah.
think.
And you did sake training too, right? You got some sommelier certifications and stuff?
Yeah, so initially I read John Gottner's book, which gave me really good basic knowledge, and then after that I took WSET Sake Level 3. It's the highest sake course they offer. That gave me a more in-depth breadth of knowledge, and then after that I also participated in Japan Sake and Shochu Association's yearly sake and shochu seminar.
Oh, cool.
And lastly, I recently got a certification from Japan Sake Sommeliers Association.
Were those useful in like, because what I really want to talk to you about today is kind of how to improve your palate as just like a sake drinker. But like, I assume that when you came, you were kind of thinking sake was like ricey and boozy and not much else. And now, at least when we do the tastings together, I'm always very impressed at how much you can kind of pull out of the sake. But like, was that something that you were able to do before the training or after? Was that kind of after the training?
It was, I think tasting and knowing the facts are different things. So I think you can actually taste as deeply as anybody without having the base knowledge of why things taste that way. Um, but I think in some of the certifications I did take, they'll give you like a tasting sheet and they'll teach you how to put the taste into values. So for example, WSCT, they will teach you to put sweetness or dryness on a scale of 7, to teach you to put the strength of aroma and so on, so that you have a standardized base to talk about the flavor, which I think is really helpful to anyone who's trying to learn how to taste. Because if you don't have a standard set of language to talk about the tasting, um, you're just not going to be able to really convey. You're not going to be able to convey what you really think, because one person saying, "Oh, this has a strong aroma," would be different than someone else saying this has a strong aroma, because strong to them may mean very different things,
Uh-huh.
right? But I don't think it's necessary to really take a course to know how to taste. That's more about just drinking a lot and focusing on the taste itself.
Does your sense of taste change? Like the more sake you drink, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone I met, if you're really paying attention to what you're drinking and you're spending time to understand it, your palate will change. So initially, when I first started, I really liked high aroma, very fruity sakes, and now I tend towards more umami, calm style with a lot of depth. Whereas it's those really high aroma ones, I'm kind of getting tired of.
Uh-huh. What do you mean by depth?
A long finish, complexity of flavors and aromas. Not something that's very light tasting, but something that kind of really remains in your mouth, remains on your palate, gives you a lot to think about even after you swallowed it.
This is what I'm talking about when I say that I'm always impressed because I don't. It's hard for me to imagine exactly what you mean, even then.
Maybe it's a limitation of my explanation, right? But I think it's one of those things where as we're talking about tasting, really the best way to learn about tasting is to have things you can compare. And I can be like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
this one is light like water, it doesn't have that many flavors, and after you swallow it, nothing's going on. Versus this other one, you leave it in your mouth, it tastes like coffee, it tastes like the earth, it tastes like dried leaves, and then even after you swallow it, you get uh, more of how those flavors evolve. Um,
Mhm.
so it really, when you have something to try and compare, that's really the best way.
That makes sense, yeah. In terms of that level of tasting, noticing, oh, this one is fruity and sweet versus this one's very light, this one's very rich or heavy. Like when did you start being able to put that into words?
Yeah. So in terms of tasting notes and being able to describe how you taste, I think a lot of my guests that I serve are often impressed because they're like, "Oh wow, you can pick up all these things. You must have a really good palate." And what I think is most people can train to have a decent palate. They just never try to because it's not like you're born being able to say like, oh yeah, this smells like lemon or this smells like a certain flower. But when you go and actually go smell those things and try to remember those smells and then compare it to whatever you're drinking, you start developing vocabulary for it. So it's really more about practice than how good your nose is. And what I recommend is when you first start, just have a sheet of tasting notes. Ideally categorized, by fruits, by nuts, whatever, by flowers. And as you're smelling and tasting something, go through that sheet and just see what this reminds you of. Right? There's no wrong answers because we're not tasting actual juices of any fruit. We're just tasting something that reminds you, is reminiscent of that note that you're thinking of.
Do you go around like smelling other stuff
I sometimes do.
to build that
I,
vocabulary?
I, I
Yeah.
do. I pay more attention to it now. Like when I go to a restaurant, when I have a meal, I'll always smell the thing first. If I have nothing better to do and I'm at a supermarket, I will go and smell all the fruits.
Okay.
But look, you don't have to do that. You just remember what you smelled and describe other things with those smells. That's really the main exercise that it takes.
Are you are like a perfume guy at all? Or just with like food aroma?
Just with food aroma, but I think it translates to anything. So, like, as a sake professional, I can also taste wine. My wine vocabulary isn't as well trained as my sake, but the way you taste, the way you smell, it's basically the same. And I can do the same with
Yeah.
whiskey, with rum, whatever it is that you want to drink.
Is there much flavor overlap or an aroma overlap or not so
Yeah,
much?
absolutely, absolutely. Like for example, apple, pear are some of the aromas that you get frequently in sake, and then in certain types of white wine, you also get those. But then you have stuff like lactic notes in sake. You might get yogurt very often, which is more rare in wine. But then a oaked wine could often taste like butter, and buttery notes in sake is a little bit more rare. So you have certain categorical overlaps, but they're not exactly the same most of the time. Even like for apple, the apple aromas in sake tend to be like light green apple, versus in wine it's more ripe red apples.
Okay. Huh. And that's just like a function of the different esters and stuff in the sake?
I believe so, yeah.
Because you do, so I should say we do a lot of tastings that most everybody is kind of a beginner
Hmm.
with sake, often a beginner with like doing a tasting in the first place. Um, what, how do you get somebody up to speed?
I always explain the basics, and of course, it depends on who my guests are. I change the content based on how much people know. But originally, well, okay, hold on, not originally, but like initially, I will always explain that sake is four ingredients: rice, koji, yeast, and water. And I designed the course in a way that we explore different types of sake, and then we do a comparison where usually only one ingredient or one process is different, to show people, here's what could happen um, just with that one difference, right? So initially, we'll introduce two sakes, usually one dry and umami, and usually one that's sweeter and fruitier. And through these comparisons and explaining what's in the sake, and giving the guests a chance to taste the differences, is going to really show people, okay, I get a very good baseline now of what this is supposed to be.
Uh-huh. Is that like, is explaining the process important, do you think? Because this is something I've just been thinking about recently. That like with beer, I feel like most people don't necessarily know much about how beer is made, other than it's made from a grain and there's something called malt that's involved in some way. But beer is very, very popular these days. Where wine, because it's just grape water age, like the factors are very simple. But sake is much more like beer, where you can do a lot of different things to make a lot of different flavors. Do you think that explaining like, so there's nothing in this but rice, water, koji, and yeast is helpful?
Yeah.
Or is it just kind of the way most people talk about it?
So I actually think it is helpful, because I have a lot of guests saying like, oh, so there's no apples in here. Right. So they don't understand that, like, oh, these flavors are from the yeast and from how fermentation works, as opposed to some kind of additive. And then on top of that, um, a lot of guests think that sake is distilled, or they'll be like, oh, the distillery does blah and blah. And those are very different processes. Now, of course, but depending on how much you know about tasting and alcohol, and how much you know about fermentation, the way that fermentation versus distillation, the amount of actual knowledge that you'll get from understanding some of these base facts may be limited. But at the same time, if you don't have these and you're just talking about the taste, you're kind of lacking a base on why certain things taste certain ways, or how those tastes are becoming a factor in the drink you're drinking, right? So, like, you know in sake, it's really common for people to compare it to wine, for people who, especially for people who don't know much about sake. But then,
Yeah.
because of the way it's made, and because of what's important in a good sake versus good wine, sake is really not about terroir, right? And without explaining
Mhm.
some of these basic facts, people won't really understand that.
Yeah, that makes sense, I guess. Um, yeah, I just don't. I wonder. I've been wondering about that recently, just because it's so. The way we talk about sake is like very different from the way I feel like most people talk about wine or beer or even distilled beverages. There's so much more focus on like the intricacies of production rather than the flavor, I guess.
Because I think sake has a wider range of flavor than most other brewed drinks, in my opinion.
Hmm.
You can have something that's completely dry and water-like, and then you can also have something that tastes like really sweet yogurt, which is not a range that most other beverages have.
Yeah.
So I think, focusing purely on the flavor, you do have kind of an infinite space to go on. which is not so productive when you're talking about understanding tasting in a way that relates to the beverage. Versus for wine, again, I'm not a wine expert, so I don't want to say too much. That might be wrong. But for wine, my understanding is that it's really all about the terroir.
Mm.
What kind of climate does this region have? What kind of weather was that year? And that's why this wine tastes like this. And that's why I think a lot of blended wines and a lot of natural wines don't get as much respect as single varietal wines from really good wineries, really good plots of land. Versus in sake, it just doesn't really matter. But when someone uses a different koji, or when someone uses a unique yeast and it creates a very unique flavor, that's what gets people talking.
Yeah. Because like yeast is the source of most of the flavor of sake, right?
I would say most of the aroma of sake, or at least the fruity ones. You get umami from rice. You get like ricey, kind of richer. You get lactic flavors from a combination of the rice and the yeast. And of course, like, depending on your hardness of the water, how you perceive those flavors are different too. So, like I don't like to put a single ingredient too forward, because I realize, it's really the combination of everything.
Mm-hmm. Can you generally guess the yeast if it's like one of the usual ones?
No.
Okay.
Short answer is no. I think there are a handful of yeasts that are really uh has really distinct character, but like ultimately you can cover it all up with how you.
Uh-huh.
So I think it's really difficult to. I've never met anyone who can.
Yeah. Are there any sakes that you can just it off the bat if you taste it? You're like, oh, this is blah blah blah.
Occasionally, I've done blinds before, and very occasionally I'll have a sake that it's like, this is most likely that. And especially if you have like a list of sakes that you can choose from, it makes it a lot more likely that you can guess what it is if you've had a lot. But I think it's still very difficult, because like even temperature and the type of glass you drink it from is going to change the taste. And unless if you have an extremely good palate and extremely good memory, some of these sakes are really hard to tell just without looking at the bottle.
So what does it mean to be like a good taster of sake then?
I think being able to identify flavor differences, and of course, if you're in the service industry, especially if you're hosting people, being able to talk about what flavor a sake has, it's extremely important. Um, Sake can be very delicate, and it can, not have that much differences between sake A and sake B. And if you're a good taster, you should be able to, one, taste those differences, and two, understand and verbalize what those differences are. So, one might be lighter body than the other, another one might be more umami and whatnot. And if you want to go to the next level after you're able to taste all of that, be able to explain why that may be. So, okay, it's less umami and it's lighter because sake B has a higher polishing ratio.
Yeah. And do you think it's important to do like formal tastings to get better, or is just bringing a notebook and writing down as you like go out to eat and stuff like that, and more like a casual way to get better?
I mean, I am not a fan of sitting down and studying for long periods of time. So a lot of what I do is going out, tasting something, and then focusing on it, taking some notes. And I think for most people, that's what's going to work. But if you really do want to get to the next level, you do need to sit down and do formal tastings. So what's helped me a lot in the past, and what I found to be very challenging as well, is number one, doing kind of flavor matching exercises. So, for example, you'll have seven sakes come out. You won't know what they are. They'll be numbered 1 through 7. You try those out, and then you take those back. You change the order, and then you match the order with what you've had. So, for example, sake number 1 could now be sake number 7, and then just through flavor, if you can match that, that's really going to train your palate in terms of recognizing certain flavors and remembering.
How do you do that? How do you do that by yourself though?
It's really difficult to do by yourself,
Uh-huh.
admittedly. It's ideal if you have someone who can help you set it up.
Okay.
But
So like get a sake tasting group together or something. Like
yes, that would
do
be the
like a
most
party.
ideal. Now, of course, if you don't have as many friends, just space it out a little bit. I mean, ideally, your memory is not good enough that, like, you make one order and then you make the second order, you just hopefully don't remember it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, but I think without a group, it's difficult to perfectly do by yourself.
And you just like what kind of glass would you use for that? Just like an ochoko, like a small little one or
I always think ideally if you're tasting, use something that's akin to a wine glass, something that's gonna, hold the aromas. But if you have like 6, 7 different sakes, I know it might be hard.
yeah.
Like, honestly, anything works. You just don't want to change the glass
Uh
like halfway through. You want to make sure everything uses the same glass through the whole
uh-huh.
exercise. Anyway, I think number two, I recently went to a sake blind tasting, which I thought is not quite possible
Okay.
because it's not about, where you got the sake. It's really about the sake itself. And what I've learned from that was, they'll have certain hints like, oh, this sake has 13% alcohol, or like this is made with number 7 yeast, or whatever, this is Kimoto. Um, and also like they'll ask you for which sake you think it is, like what number, and then they'll also
Oh, so
ask.
this is like you get six sake and it's like one of these is a 13%, one of these is a Kimoto, one of these is number 7 yeast. Match the six sake that you got to these six characteristics kind of thing.
Exactly, so we actually got 10 sakes,
Okay.
which I thought was everyone there thought was really challenging.
That's a lot, yeah.
And then you get just certain hints, for each of those 10 things you might get 1 or 2 hints about the sake, like a
Uh-huh.
spec.
Okay.
um yeah, so that that helped somewhat, because I think without that it's completely impossible to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the second question they asked was, which sake do you think this is? And then they'll have names of different labels,
Hmm.
and you just have to write down the label.
Like
You don't have to write
multiple
down the
choice kind of
sake.
thing.
Yeah. And then, like, within that, for example, there was a Hanatomoe. It was very funky, very cheesy, and very sweet. And I knew instantly that was like the Hanatomoe Mizumoto.
Uh-huh.
Because that's just a very, very distinct sake. Like, how many sakes are very cheesy and very funky, and then at the same time quite sweet?
Yeah.
There's not that.
Is that like so was that just like for fun? Like was that like a party game that you did or was that like an event? What was that?
It was an event hosted by one of the popular sake restaurants called Hidejiro. They don't do it very often. I think, in fact, that was the first time they did it. And I thought it'd be good practice, and it's something that I wanted to do on my own, like host on my own as well, because I think it really does help train your palate.
Uh-huh.
Because, like, how many chances do you have to really sit and focus on the drink and have to think very hard about the differences between a number of different drinks? It's quite a rare experience.
Yeah. So it wasn't like a competition or something like that where like you got a prize if you did well. It was just let's have a fun
Yeah,
time
didn't
doing it.
didn't prepare anything like that,
Okay.
unfortunately. Well, no, someone ended up mentioning it. They ended up giving like a little bit of a prize.
Okay.
Um, I didn't win it though,
Ah,
so
bummer. So what about for somebody who's not living in Japan though? Well, how like I think America has a lot of good sake available now, depending on where you are. But in general, how do you like maybe somebody wants to be like you, come to Japan and work in the sake industry, but they're not there yet. How would they go about maybe like building their palate oriented towards working in the sake industry in the future?
yeah. So I think without being in Japan, you're never really gonna get the depth of sake that we have here, just because there's a lot of seasonal stuff that don't really leave the country. There's a lot of limited edition stuff, but at the same time, if you are in an area that where you can get a certain, a decent selection of sake, whether it's online or at a shop, what I recommend is get the same, or like get different sakes from the same producer.
Okay.
So, if you can learn to taste differences based on different rice, for example, or different polishing ratio, while everything else is the same, that's going to be the most ideal way of getting started on learning differences. Because if you're getting two different sakes from two different breweries, you're essentially just drinking very different things. And how much you can learn from that, well, of course, you can compare the taste and then be able to verbalize the taste differences. But understanding what's actually causing those differences, you need to really taste the same sake, just one difference. So, I try to do that a lot. And I think even if you're not in Japan, you're going to be able to get, like the same sake from the same producer, just different rice. Or like, a Junmai Daiginjo with 50% polishing and then a Junmai Ginjo with 60%. And then those will be great ways to learn. And I think a lot of distributors, whether you're in Japan or not, will carry things like that you can look for.
And that's just, you want to decrease the number of variables that are going to be different, basically.
Exactly. As a way to learn, you want to have variables that you want to have just one or two different variables that are different, with everything else being consistent.
Interesting. Has there ever been? Are there flavors? Are there flavors in sake that you don't like?
I am a pretty open-minded person when it comes to taste. I think more so than most people I've met who are professionals. I can't really think of something that I straight up just don't like. I think off flavors are not great. So in this case, like something that's very namahine,
What
kind
is
of
namahine
sharp.
though?
Yes, namahine is a off flavor that you get when unpasteurized sake is not stored perfectly. That said, I think it happens a lot even with the most carefully stored unpasteurized sake. I think it's just a natural flavor that occurs when you don't store that a natural flavor that happens in namasake, in unpasteurized sake. But it tastes like this kind of sharp, grassy note that is not all that pleasant, and it's overpowering. Although some people actually like it.
Okay. But when you say grassy, I kind of have like an image of sharpness and grassiness is a little confusing to me, maybe.
It kind of goes up your nose, I guess, is what I mean when I say it's quite
Like
sharp,
wasabi
and
or
also
mustard?
kind of,
Okay.
yeah. And then at the same time, it's not this mellow taste.
Uh-huh.
I think the opposite of mellow.
Gotcha. And that's about it in terms of like kind of like, oh, this is gonna be maybe not so nice.
Yeah, I used to not like really earthy or like really alcoholic flavors, but recently I've been finding those quite pleasant.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so again, this is a very personal thing where some people might have a lot of likes and dislikes. I just don't
Yeah.
as a person. Yeah.
Are there so can you use aroma though to tell other than like the namahine aroma? Like can you use aroma to tell if your sake's gone bad?
It depends. There are certain aromas, like, if you smell something that's like burnt hair, that means the sake has been left out in the sun
Okay.
for too long and it's gone bad. If you smell something that's kind of like, oh, this smells like stale sake, it probably means it should have been in the fridge
Uh-huh.
and it's been left out. Other than that, I think your body is very good at telling you what's not good for you. So when you smell something that smells like, oh, it's food gone bad, I think it's the same for sake,
Uh-huh.
right? Like if it smells like it's gone bad, maybe it has gone bad. Um, but other than that, yeah, I don't think you can really purely tell from the smell.
Yeah. Well, what how would you describe staleness exactly?
When you have a very fresh sake, it's going to give you very fresh smelling notes. So, fresh fruits, freshly cut grass, for example. And then when you have something stale, it might taste or smell a little bit more like uh, stewed fruits,
Okay.
for example. Or, it smells like grass that's half rotten.
Uh-huh. So it's not necessarily as like acidic, maybe.
Um,
Like not
mm,
necessarily flavor wise, but like smelling wise.
when I smell acidity, I think it's a little bit different for me
Okay.
because, to some degree, you can smell certain things that smell like sourness. Stale doesn't necessarily reflect that. It's more of like a lack of freshness. I think
Mm,
it's a better way of
okay.
putting it. Yeah. And for anyone who's smelled room temperature aged sake, it's going to smell very calm and kind of like dirt soy sauce.
Hmm.
And those are a lot of stale-ish smells. And of course, it's different from a unpasteurized sake gone bad stale.
Uh-huh.
But comparing that with a very freshly pressed unpasteurized sake, you get a lot of the difference.
Yeah. So it's like maybe an aged sake is really far, 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 far to the one side of the spectrum of staleness. And then like the reason staleness would be bad is not so much that it's like maybe a bad flavor, just it's like it's not enough of a particular flavor.
It's balance going away, right?
Uh-huh.
When something's made to be fresh, it has a balance to emphasize the freshness, versus when something's made to be aged and tastes aged, it's not going to have those nice fresh notes. But then when you have those nice fresh notes, but it's not stored properly, and those fresh notes are stale, it's just not good.
Uh-huh. Gotcha. Because yeah, I'm just wondering, for me, wine, I feel like you taste wine and you're like, oh, this is now vinegar. Cool. But with sake, I've kept sake in my fridge for years, open for years, and it does not vinegarize in the same way. So it's hard to know, like, if you open a bottle of milk and it's gone bad, you know exactly when it's gone bad. But
Well, ultimately, I think it's about, is it pleasant to drink? Because milk that's gone bad, whether it's pleasant or not to drink, hopefully not, it's gonna make you sick.
uh-huh.
Whereas I think wine or sake, when it's gone bad, it's not gonna make you sick. It just won't taste good. Um, so I think ultimately it's, do you think it tastes good or not? And if you think it doesn't taste good, then it's, for all intents and purposes, it's gone bad.
Uh-huh. Gotcha. That makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
That's kind of it for the questions I had that I wanted
Okay.
to ask you about. Do you think I missed anything, or you want to answer a question I didn't ask you?
I think in terms of tasting, um, it's really about practicing drinking a lot of different sake and writing down, or at least in your head, memorizing what you thought of each. There's not a right or wrong answer to any of this, right? When we say something tastes like apple, there's no apples actually in the sake that we're tasting. But it's that, this reminds us of apple, and we're able to verbalize it like that. And I think for people who don't have as much access to sake, just taste what you have. Try to get do some research online, maybe, of what types of spec what spec does the sake have, so that you have some semblance of idea of what you're trying to drink, and that way you're going to really be able to practice. Other than that, also try different glasses, because a choco or shot glass is not going to give you very many aromas, versus a wine glass, it's going to give you all of the aromas. um, Other than that, also, like, just because you're a sake person doesn't mean you shouldn't try out other drinks and learn other drinks. I think, learning about wine, learning about rum, I'm a huge cocktail person as well. It really opens up your mind to different flavor notes and the differences between the different drinks that are out there, and it teaches you range of flavors.
Yeah, my experience is limited in terms of tasting. I would say I don't really have a refined palate, but I think that all makes sense to me, at least.
Well, I think it takes time to really develop a palate, because when I first started, I wanted to be very good and I was very confident. But then comparing now to then, I just know so much more now, and I've tasted so many more things, and my palate's truly, I think, pretty decent now. And honestly, the better it gets, the less and less I'm like, oh, I know everything. Just because there's always so many more things to taste. And like the more you test yourself, the more you realize like, oh yeah, you're wrong a lot more than often than you're right with sake, just because it's, again, not about any specific ingredient or any specific process. It's a combination of everything. And, if it took me 6 years of being in Japan and drinking sake almost every day to develop a decent palate, nobody should really be rushing, right? Um, and I think that goes for drinking much of anything. You really need to have a lot of it, put it in your brain, and repeat that process enough times to really remember and really understand.
Yeah, that makes sense. It definitely feels like to develop your palate, though, you kind of do have to be a little scientific about it, and not just enjoy sake, but treat it as a little bit more like work, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think drinking for a vast majority of people should be a fun activity, not something you do purely for work. And I think that's the same for me. If I didn't find it fun, I don't think I can continue it.
Yeah.
At the same time, like I think your fun can be deepened if you have some knowledge of the thing that you're doing for fun. So in this sense, if instead of just drinking and enjoying the taste and getting drunk, if I'm able to also think a little bit about, oh, why this tastes this way, or maybe be a little bit surprised about, oh, it tastes like this, even though the specs are completely different. It makes it more fun, right? So don't treat it as work. I think keep it fun for yourself. Just find out what's fun for you.
I think that's a good place to end it, probably, for today. Thank you, Aaron, for coming on the show and talking a little bit about tasting and your experience becoming a professional sake guy, a professional taster in some respects. So,
well, thank you for having me, and I hope that was helpful to people who are starting out in tasting. Again, try different things and take some notes, but keep it fun, and you'll learn naturally.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll put some information about where you can find Aaron and learn more about his activities in the show notes. That will do it for this episode of Sake on Air. Please take a moment to review and rate us on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you may be enjoying the show on, and feel free to send your questions and comments to questions@sakeonair.com or at Sake on Air on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. You can also find us on YouTube as well. We'll be back with more Sake on Air very soon. And so, all for today. Kampai.
Kampai.
Sake on Air is made possible with the generous support of the Japan Sake and Shochu Makers Association and is broadcast from the Japan Sake and Shochu Information Center in downtown Tokyo. It is produced by Export Japan, and our team is Shuso Imada, Justin Potts, Arlene Lyons, Cindy Bissig, Chris Hughes, Chris Pellegrini, John Gottner, Marie Nagata, Miho Ota, Rebecca Wilson-Lai, Sebastian Lemoine, and me, Frank Walter. Until next time, kampai!